Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Abigail Lowery of DeForest is a Democrat running in the 37th Assembly District. Abigail, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this opportunity.
I noticed on your campaign website that you say one of your campaign issues and priorities is social justice. Now, in light of the national debate, well, okay, it's on our front door, given Kenosha, the debate over policing reform, how can we, steps to achieve social justice come closer, and maybe what policing reforms do you think should be enacted?
Yeah, I'll start with social justice piece. When I think of social justice, especially in the state of Wisconsin, we have to address our racial disparities in pretty much all aspects of life in Wisconsin, particularly with our Black residents. And we have to start from when they're first born to adulthood. And when we look at when they're babies, Wisconsin has the highest Black infant mortality rate in the country. And the sad thing is, if you look in general, we have a fairly low mortality rate. But then when you look at our Black babies, they have the highest mortality rate in the country. And I do not see action on this at the state level. And I think we definitely need to address that. Other aspects for social justice to work on as our children get older are definitely our public education system. I think that's our best opportunity to get children the best start in life as possible. We need to make sure that we're funding public education appropriately, providing wraparound supports that children need based on, if they have a homeless situation or experienced abuse or other difficulties in their life. Racism itself can be a trauma. And we need to make sure that all children in our public schools throughout the state have equal opportunity to pursue whatever path in life they choose after high school. And then going on as they're older, we definitely need to have criminal justice reforms. If you look at marijuana, we are disproportionately incarcerating our Black fellow neighbors in Wisconsin. And that's an issue that we don't need to incarcerate people around. I think it's a personal freedom issue and not necessarily any more harmful than alcohol use. And then finally on social justice, we need to elect more people of color to our local boards, our county boards, and our state legislature, because if they have a voice, they will be able to make these changes possible as well. And in terms of police reforms, I think that we definitely need to, I do support the 9 bills put forward by the governor and the Black Legislative Caucus. I think we definitely need to have a consistent de-escalation training across the state. We have very good de-escalation training right here in DeForest, where I live, with our police department, and we're seeing great outcomes with it. I think that should be available throughout the state. No-knock warrants and chokeholds, that's just not a very good practice. And I think a lot of police departments throughout the state would say, they don't do it or don't agree with it. And we just need to do that bare minimum requirement. And then also common sense approach to use of force, not using it unless it's absolutely necessary, and only using the amount of force that's really the least amount of force that's necessary in a given situation.
Okay, let's talk about the pandemic and COVID that we're still in the grips with. If the pandemic slows our economy, and I'll make up a number, if we don't collect $1 billion in taxes to fund critical state services, you're in the legislature, how would you fill a $1 billion shortfall?
Well, I would start with, I think even if we're dealing with COVID-19 and we're dealing with a budget shortfall, there's certain approaches that need to be made for the budget that I know I would do, whether there's a shortfall, whether there's COVID-19 or not. One is that we definitely, I know that I would make sure that whatever my priorities are in the budget are in line with the priorities of people in the district in terms of, what we need to do, especially with a budget shortfall. And then also whatever we do with that budget shortfall or the budget in general, that the least amount negative impact possible on our lower and middle income earners, because those are the vast majority of people that live in the 37th district and also throughout the state. And I also think other things that we can do to save money, whether there's a shortfall or not, but I think obviously it would be very helpful with a budget shortfall, is we can make sure that state projects have multiple bidders to make sure that we are actually really getting the lowest qualified bid and it's a competitive process. That we weed out pet projects that members of the Joint Finance Committee have, because that obviously adds money, and it should be more appropriately handled with individual bills that and legislators can look through it and see if it's a priority for the state. And then also with nonpartisan redistricting, I definitely support that. And if we move towards that, we will have fair maps and also save money in attorney's fees, because we will not have to use money for attorney's fees to defend rigged maps. The rigged maps will be no more.
One, a very emotional issue on the pandemic is face masks. The governor has a decision on September 28th to extend the statewide edict on face masks or let it lapse. What's your recommendation?
I think there needs to be a two-pronged approach to it. I do believe that if it comes to that date and the governor and the public health experts that are guiding him see that it's still important to put in place, I would agree with going forward. That the nice thing about masks is that they're cheap, they're easy to use, and they're pretty effective when combined with social distancing and washing your hands and things like that. And the second part of the approach is we definitely need to elect people that believe and practice these precautions. We have a lot of people currently in the state legislature that seem to flaunt these precautions or actively, you'll see pictures of them on social media not wearing masks, standing close to someone else in an indoor crowded facility. And we need elected officials that not only advocate for certain things, but also practice what they preach. And I think we definitely need that right now.
Well, we've seen the role that hospitals have played nationally and in Wisconsin treating COVID-19 patients. If you're elected voting on the next state budget, should hospitals get an even greater priority than they may have in the current budget, Abigail?
That's very possible. Definitely with COVID-19, it's a very fluid situation, and we've seen lots of changes and new information come just in the last 6 months that we've been dealing with it. So it's hard for me to say for sure what exactly my priorities will be with the next budget, given that fluid situation, and also given that I want to make sure that I get adequate feedback from residents in the district. But I do feel that if we're still very much in the throes of COVID-19 and our hospitals need those resources, especially resources in my district with rural hospitals too, I will definitely be a proponent of that, because I definitely think that we need to take care of people in our state. That's why we're elected.
A bill that was just introduced says that a business or organization that follows COVID-19 protocols to protect its patients, customers, or employees could not be sued over COVID. Is that a bill you could vote for?
I would say, at least at this moment, I would not. And that's because, looking through, doing my own personal research, I've not seen a single case or a single frivolous lawsuit brought forward. And sometimes I think that if we create and pass legislation for a problem that's not really a problem, we can actually create a new problem in itself. And also, I think that, after I actually looked at the bill and looked at the text, it mentions that it would not apply to those who knowingly engage in reckless, wanton, or intentional misconduct. And I see that seems pretty hard to prove and is a pretty big hurdle, especially if there is some real flagrant disregarding of precautions. And also, finally, I would say, I don't think, at least with this particular issue at this particular time, that the legislature is the best one to deal with this issue. We have the courts This is their area of expertise and experience, and I think they're the best ones to weed out frivolous lawsuits.
Because Wisconsin is a high property tax state, we have limited the ability of school districts and local governments to levy property taxes for more than 20 years. Do you think these limits, these caps, should stay in place to control property taxes on homes?
I've thought a lot about this issue because I'm a local elected official in DeForest. So we certainly deal with that issue. But I know if I'm elected to be a state representative of the 37th district, I will definitely represent a lot more than DeForest, and DeForest is not necessarily representative of all the communities in the district. So I've definitely taken a lot of time to talk with local elected officials throughout the district. And my understanding, at least with the approach for municipal government, that, and they can tell me later if I'm incorrect in this assumption, that we should probably keep levy limits in place, but have some flexibility or tweak it for certain instances where local governments have an essential service that they have to pay for and don't necessarily have the growth in tax base to just easily do that. I think we need to have some more flexibility. In terms of school districts, I think that instead of thinking in terms of levy limits, I think our approach needs to be more in line of increasing state aid. That's kind of, we had a big cut in state aid in 2011, and I don't think we've completely been made whole since that. And then also local property taxes are funding the majority, somewhere around 50% of public education for their school districts. And, both the federal government made a promise many years ago that they would adequately fund special education, and they certainly have not held up to that promise. And I'm not running for federal office, so I can't do anything about that, but the state can certainly help with public education funding in general, and which would also benefit special education, which, as a former special education teacher, I know is very expensive because our students with special needs certainly need a lot of resources, and it's not always cheap to provide that.
Sorry.
And it would, and also the added bonus is that would alleviate the local property tax burden on school districts.
As a local elected official, let me ask you this. Do cities, villages, and towns, do they need alternative sources of revenue so they're not so reliant on the property tax? Milwaukee Democratic Rep. Evan Goyke has a bill that says if Milwaukee passes a referendum, it could levy a 0.5-cent sales tax on its own. Do local governments like the one you serve on need alternative sources of revenue?
That's a good question. I'm certainly open to exploring that and getting more feedback from local elected officials in my district. I do know myself, being a local elected official, that finding new revenue, especially when you have certain things that you need to pay for, is pretty tricky. But in terms of specific strategies, I would definitely want to reach out more to local elected officials, and I certainly will if I'm elected. That is a high priority and is a current priority as well.
The gas tax right now is 30.9 cents per gallon. It hasn't been raised in more than 10 years. Governor Evers proposed that it go up last year. It didn't pass. Are you willing to raise the gas tax to help permanently pay for our roads and our bridges?
I support indexing the gas tax to inflation. We did that for many years, but from the mid 80s to the mid aughts, and we did that in a bipartisan manner. And I don't see why we can't go back to that. I heard from people in the 37th district, including local elected officials, that they're very concerned about the quality of their roads, and we have to do something about it. Politicians will say, well, let's not raise taxes, but leaders need to say, we need to make the right decision, even if it's not the easiest or most popular one. And I think our roads and transportation issues falls under that.
Drawing again on your experience as a local official, if a local government or a school district plans a major public works project, should that government entity have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
I am supportive of that idea. If there was a bill put forward, I'd have to look at all the whole text to make sure how I would vote on that particular bill. But I'm definitely supportive of that idea. I think that Wisconsin companies are probably the most knowledgeable and experienced for Wisconsin projects, And then also you think about who they would employ. It'd likely be Wisconsin residents who are paying, taxes to Wisconsin, who are raising their families here, where they, buy things from local businesses for their family. The children that they raise are more likely to live here as they graduate from high school, go to school here, have careers here. There's just a lot of economic benefit from that.
Okay, and then finally, you want to highlight differences between you and the Republican incumbent you're trying to unseat on November 3rd?
Definitely. There's a lot of differences. I think the biggest one comes down to responsiveness to constituents. I am a village trustee in DeForest. It is a very part-time job. We're only paid $5,000 a year, but I would say I have a very high response rate to village residents in terms of making sure I advocate for their priorities as well as address concerns as they come up. I think even people that live here who don't necessarily always agree with me, I think they would say that I am very responsive to residents. Whereas my opponent, that's one of the reasons why I'm running, because I've contacted him so many times and had very minimal responses to emails and voicemails, and talking to people throughout the district. A lot of people have had that experience, even going to the Capitol, letting him know ahead of time that they were coming and want to speak to him, and he's not there and doesn't have an explanation why he's not there to talk with his constituents. And I think that's really disrespectful. It's not doing your job. And I think it's, and also we know that state legislators in Wisconsin have the 9th highest salary in Wisconsin that they should be able to do. It's a full-time job. They're paid well. They have staff to help them to make sure that they respond to constituents. So I know I would do that. And even though, if I'm elected, people in the 37th district might not always agree with me, but I think they would know that I will always tell them where I stand on an issue and always listen, no matter what.
Thank you. Abigail Lowery of DeForest is a Democrat running in the 37th Assembly District. The election is November 3. Abigail, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Great time.
Take care. Thank you.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.